Here's something nobody wants to admit. We didn't abandon our standards. We just kept adjusting them downward, one small compromise at a time, until acceptable stopped meaning good and started meaning not catastrophically bad. And somewhere along the way, we agreed to call this progress. This isn't about nostalgia, it's about the quiet mechanism by which excellence becomes optional. Mediocrity becomes standard, and anyone pointing this out gets labeled as unrealistic. Let's talk about where this is happening right now. In education systems across Germany and beyond, something fundamental has shifted. The implicit goal is no longer ensuring competence. It is ensuring progression. Students move forward whether core skills are solid or shaky. Reading comprehension, writing clarity, basic mathematic reasoning, these aren't gates anymore. They are suggestions. This didn't happen because teachers stopped caring. It happened because failure was redefined. Failure used to be feedback, data showing where capability needs development. But now, failure is treated as damage, psychological harm, something to be avoided rather than learned from. The German Ausbildungssystem used to be the global standard precisely because it didn't compromise. You either demonstrated competence or you repeated until you did. That's under pressure now too, not from malice, but from the belief that progression equals kindness. Here's the provocation. When passing becomes more important than understanding, education stops being preparation and starts being postponement. You're not helping students by moving them forward. You are helping them fail later, when the stakes are higher and the safety net is gone. And it gets worse. Assignments are shorter. Language is simplified. Cognitive load is deliberately reduced. And when tools that could actually help students learn better appear, like AI that could provide personalized feedback or help students understand their mistakes, what happens? They get banned, restricted, forbidden. Not because they don't work, because teachers don't understand how they work. Because it's easier to stick with what's always been done than to learn something new. Because if you don't use AI, you can't be blamed for using it wrong. We didn't make learning easier. We make thinking optional and banned the tools that might have helped. The standard dropped twice. Once by reducing what we demand of students, and again by refusing to explore what might actually help them meet higher standards. That's not caution. That's surrender dressed as prudence. And when you produce a generation that never learned to struggle through difficult problems, never developed the tolerance for confusion that precedes understanding, never built the mental stamina that comes from sustained effort, what exactly did you prepare them for? The comfortable lie is that we are meeting students where they are. The uncomfortable truth is that we are leaving them precisely there. In business, lowered standards were a disguise called innovation. Minimum viable product was supposed to be a learning tool. Ship something functional, gather real feedback, iterate toward excellence. But somewhere in the translation from methodology to culture, it became minimum acceptable quality. Product ship incomplete. Features don't work properly. Customer experience is rough around the edges. And everyone shrugs and says, "We're iterating." Iteration used to be a path to excellence. Now it's often a substitute for it. This hits German Mittelstand companies especially hard. You build your reputation on the German Gründlichkeit, thoroughness. Your customers expected things to work properly from day one. That was your competitive advantage. But now you're being told that's old thinking, that speed trumps quality, that perfection is the enemy of done. Except here's what nobody mentions. Your customers didn't change that expectation. You did. And your competitors who kept the higher standard, they are still winning the contracts you are now losing. The second place standards dropped is even more insidious. Visibility replaced value. In many organizations today, being seen matters more than producing durable results. Being active, being aligned, being responsive in meetings, these signal competence. Actually delivering something that works, that lasts, that solves the problem completely, that takes too long. That doesn't photograph well for the quarterly update. Presentations outperform progress. Dashboards replace decisions. Language substitutes for substance. You've seen this in your own organization. The person who talks a good game gets promoted. The person who quietly ships excellent work gets overlooked because they are not visible enough. Strategic planning decks multiply while strategic execution atrophies. When storytelling outplaces delivery, organizations become theaters instead of systems. And theaters produce applause, not results. You can't invoice applause. You can't compound applause into market position. But you can absolutely build an entire culture around performing competence instead of demonstrating it. Ask yourself, in your last leadership meeting, how much time was spent reviewing how work looks versus how it performs? How many decisions were made based on narrative alignment rather than outcome achievement? The standard silently dropped from "does this work?" to "does this look like it works?" That's not innovation, that's decoration. The same pattern has infected personal standards, but it's harder to see because it's wrapped in the language of wellness. Boundaries are essential. Self-care is real, but protecting my energy has become the universal excuse for avoiding anything uncomfortable. Difficult conversations, accountability, emotional effort, growth that requires temporary discomfort. If everything that feels hard is labeled unhealthy, growth becomes indistinguishable from harm. This is the trap. Personal development requires discomfort. Building stronger relationships requires navigating conflict. Developing resilience requires exposure to difficulty. But we have created a culture where any friction is treated as toxicity and any demand is treated as boundary violation. The result? Friendships that collapse the moment they require constant effort. Relationships abandoned when they stop providing immediate validation. Personal projects drop the moment enthusiasm fades and discipline is required. We celebrate flexibility, and we should. Flexibility is valuable, but what we are actually practicing is disposability. And there is a difference. We celebrate flexibility, but quietly mourn death. Because death requires staying when it's uncomfortable. Death requires showing up when you don't feel like it. Death requires doing the work even when nobody's watching and there's no immediate reward. But we've lowered our personal standard from what kind of person do I want to become to what feels comfortable right now. And then we wonder why life feels shallow. The standard dropped, and we called it self-awareness. Finally, look at health. Not fitness influencer health, actual health. Energy, sleep, stress management, basic physical capability. Constant fatigue is normal now. Poor sleep is accepted. Stress-related issues are just part of modern life. These aren't treated as warning signs. They are treated as lifestyle defaults. German employees average less than 7 hours of sleep. Burnout is epidemic across industries. back pain, digestive issues, anxiety. These are so common, they've become personality traits instead of problems to solve. When exhaustion becomes normal, dysfunction becomes invisible. And the response? Not lifestyle change, not addressing root causes. The response is optimization of symptoms. Supplements for energy, medication for sleep, hacks for stress, quick fixes that provide short-term relief while long-term capacity continues to decline. We are very good at feeling slightly better. We are very bad at getting well. We are excellent at managing decline and terrible at building capacity. This is the lowered standard in its purest form. We stopped asking, how do I build a life that generates energy, and started asking, how do I survive the life I have? The goal shifted from thriving to coping, and we call that realistic. But it's not realistic, it's resigned. And there's a catastrophic difference between those two things. Lowered standards rarely announce themselves. They don't show up with a memo declaring, "We are accepting less now." They arrive disguised as kindness, efficiency, flexibility, or realism. They arrive with good intentions and reasonable sounding justifications. And each individual adjustment seems harmless, rational even. But aggregated across education, business, personal life and health, you get a society that's extraordinarily good at justifying underperformance and extraordinarily bad at demanding more, especially from ourselves. Because here's the real risk. It's not that we expect less of others. It's that we stop expecting more of ourselves and call it progress. We mistake accommodation for wisdom. We confuse comfort with health. We treated lowered standards as evolved thinking. And then we are surprised when results decline. When quality erodes, then depth disappears, then nothing seems to work as well as it used to. The standard dropped. That's why. Here's what I want to sit with you until the next episode. Where in your organization or in your own life have you quietly adjusted the definition of good enough? Not where standards have deliberately raised or lowered, where they drifted, where acceptable silently became sufficient, became fine for now, became the permanent state. Find one area, just one, where you lowered the bar without meaning to. And then ask yourself, what would it take to raise it back? Not to perfection, not to impossible, just back to where it actually means something. Because standards don't maintain themselves. They require defense. And that defense starts with admitting where they've already been compromised. See you in the next episode.